Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, the five most important true freshmen to this Clemson program heading into 2024, at least in my opinion, one of the most exciting conversations to have around this Clemson team, where it seems like every single year, and Clemson has these true freshmen that really become difference makers during the college football season. I think Dabo Swinney, this personnel staff, they do a great job of identifying some of these freshmen that have the opportunity and the ability to come in and play early and be impact players for this Clemson team. You go back to 2023, guys like TJ Parker and Peter Woods and Avian Terrell and Tyler Brown, they all emerged as, legitimately some of the best players on that Clemson roster in 2023. I think you look at the 2024 season and say, hey, we got some freshmen that wouldn't surprise you to be some of the most important members to this Clemson team in the 2024 season. Want to get into my five most important true freshmen. We're going to work from 5 to 1. Now, before we get into it, as always, one, to the Clemson fans, a lot of different names that you could go to. I'll give some honorable mentions at the end, but whether you agree with the takes, whether you disagree, I would love to hear some names that excite you the most heading into 2024 for this true freshman class. And of course, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. The amount of support that the Clemson fans have shown over the last couple of weeks, it's truly been amazing. We appreciate you guys. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with, a cat that we talked about a ton when he committed to Clemson a little over 12 months ago. And that's safety Ricardo Jones. I loved Ricardo Jones coming out of high school at 6'3", 190 pounds. He was this ball-hawking safety that, always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. His sophomore and junior year combined had over 13 interceptions. You combine the length and the range that Ricardo Jones has. This is a premier ball-hawking safety. And I think why Ricardo Jones has the opportunity to play early for Clemson and be one of those guys that has a massive impact, it's kind of two different reasons. One, I think he's ready from both a physical standpoint and between the ears. And one of the things we talked about with Ricardo Jones is this kid's instincts were kind of off the chart. He understands the game of football at such a high level. That's normally what keeps a lot of these true freshmen off the field, is just not knowing what they're doing enough. I don't think you have that problem with Ricardo Jones. You look at the physicality standpoint and say 6'3", 195, it feel pretty good about the physicality as well. And I think why he has the opportunity to play early is, premier ball hawking safety. I mean, RJ Mickens has played a lot of football. You have a guy like Tyler Venables and some other veterans on this roster. I think Ricardo Jones could offer, that true difference maker, ball hawking safety that can create turnovers for this Clemson defense in the 2024 year. So you combine I think he's ready to do it. And I think he has the opportunity in terms of how this Clemson depth chart shakes out. Had a really good fall camp. Sign me up for Ricardo Jones, looking up and saying, this kid's coming up with some game-changing plays for this Clemson team early in the 2024 season. Going to number 4, we have to go with the tight end Christian Bennter. Now, the opportunity for Christian Bennter to play might be a little bit more tough to come by because you're playing behind one of the better tight ends in the ACC, and Jay Bringenstool. Every single morning when I sat down to read the Clemson fall camp notes, Dabo Swinney would talk about Christian Bennter. He even quoted him as the most talented tight end that Clemson has signed since Dabo's been there. There's been a lot of good tight ends that have come through this Clemson program. What fascinates me the most about Christian Bennter is there's a lot of different ways that you can utilize this kid. You go back to the high school film and say massive, massive catch radius, but he moves like a wide receiver. I mean, you talk about definition of matchup nightmare, right? Linebackers won't stand a chance at covering Christian Bennter up seams. You look at defensive backs and say, name me a defensive back that has the size and physicality to deal with a 6'5", 245-pound frame. I think this kid's going to get on the football field. I think the big question that we don't necessarily know the answer to is, how well can he physically hold up in the run blocking department? That's normally what keeps true freshmen off the field. We don't have that answer yet, but the amount of hype, I guess you'd say, that Dabo Swinney is throwing Christian Benter's way, you just kind of get the feeling that they're going to figure out a way to use him in the offense. I think the sign of any good coaching staff is, hey, if we have a really good football player, figure out how to get him on the football field. That sounds like the situation that you have with Christian Bennter. And we've been saying, all right, Clemson needs these difference makers, these pass catchers to step up in 2024. Christian Bennter could provide some of that juice for this Clemson program. Going to number 3, and another guy that I just think is such a good football player, and you got to figure out a way to use him, but it might be hard for him to get on the field consistently, is linebacker Sammy Brown. You are playing behind, at least in my mind, one of the better linebacker duos that we'll see in the country with Barry Carter and Wade Woodaz. That being said, Sammy Brown, he probably plays on most other programs across the country significantly. Now, for Clemson, I think the question is, all right, we have Wade, we have Barry Carter, 2 really good linebackers that are probably not going to come off the field that much. How can we get Sammy Brown on the field and let him just have an impact on the football game? Kind of going back to the conversation we had with Christian Bennter, I think you're looking at both of these kids and saying, hey, really, really good football players. They might be behind some really good football players that have a little bit more experience. We don't want to keep good football players off the field. And then what makes Sammy Brown so easy to get involved is there's a lot of different things that this kid can do. We called him Captain America coming out of high school for a reason. He is physically one of the more gifted linebackers we've seen come out of the high school ranks. He can do a lot of different things. You go back to the high school film and say he's elite dropping back in coverage. He can rush the passer off the edge. That's probably where I see Sammy Brown maybe getting some burn in some of those blitz packages where, hey, we're going to tell Sammy Brown, hey, go on the football field, pin your ears back, and go get after the quarterback. We saw that a little bit in the spring game. Again, do I think Sammy Brown, if Wade and Barry Carter stay healthy for all 12-plus games, he's probably not going to start for Clemson on defense, but this kid's going to have an impact. And you talk about special teams. I don't know if there's a better football player created to have an impact on special teams than Sammy Brown. And so this is a kid that's going to play a lot for Clemson, have an impact on this team, going to the top 2, and I think it's pretty obvious. It's the wide receivers. Let's talk about TJ Moore first, who I have at number 2 just because, Brian Wesco's been within this program since January. You look at TJ Moore and say, this is the exact wide receiver that Clemson has been looking for. We kind of said this all offseason. Talk about 2 of the most important wide receivers and players to this Clemson offense. It might be TJ Moore and Brian Wesco, who are going to be the wide receivers that can really press teams vertically down the field. TJ Moore, that was what he did at high school. This was a kid that averaged almost over 25 yards per catch at the high school ranks. He's fast, he's massive, and at the catch point, he's dominant. There's not many cornerbacks that can go up with TJ Moore from a physical standpoint and go up and make plays. We were looking for that kind of wide receiver that made safeties respect what they could do vertically. It could be Adam Randall. It certainly could be Brian Wesco, but it very well could be TJ Moore as well. And we talked about how important, Quentin Johnston was to Coach Riley's offense at TCU. I think TJ Moore is I wouldn't say a carbon copy of Quentin Johnston, but they have a very, very similar game. If TJ Moore can just be that presence and not only create big plays for Clemson down the field, but also make safeties have to respect what he can do, kind of opening up some of that middle of the field for guys like Antonio Williams or Jake Bringenstool or Tyler Brown, that's going to be potentially the biggest asset that TJ Moore brings to the table. And then number 1, Brian Wesco. I'm going with Brian Wesco for a couple of different reasons. I lean TJ Moore as a pure high school prospect. From what you're hearing about Brian Wesco coming out of spring and fall, this kid is putting it together. Now, you go back 12 months ago, and I would have been a little skeptical of Brian Wesco being a year 1 contributor because he was not a very big kid. He was 6'2", 165, probably soaking wet coming out of high school. He put on 20 pounds in the offseason for Clemson. I think he can deal with the physicality that the ACC will demand of Brian Wesco. And then you take a look at the skill set he has. Juiced up, 6'2", he's got a long frame. He's not necessarily built like TJ Moore. TJ Moore's a little bit more put together, but Brian Wesco's long, and he can go up and make plays. He obviously an extremely accomplished track and field athlete in the long jump, the high jump, the triple jump. So he's a bouncy athlete that has a big frame that can go up and make plays, but he also has legitimate burners. He's a guy that the size-speed combination that he brings to the table can give a lot of cornerbacks a lot of different problems. We're looking for that kind of wide receiver, same conversation we had with TJ Moore. Could be TJ Moore, could be Brian Wesco, could be Adam Randall, but you look at Brian Wesco and TJ Moore, say, this is 2 wide receivers that are exactly what Clemson is looking for on the offensive side of the football. Now, I want to throw in a few honorable mentions, specifically at the cornerback spot. And this has a little bit more to do with the injuries that, Shelton Lewis and Jaden Lucas have picked up during fall camp. There's a very real chance, it sounds like, that some of these true freshman cornerbacks might need to step up on the boundary and play early for Clemson. And so whether that's Tavoy, whether that's Corian Gibson, whether that's Ashton Hampton, you look at those three cornerbacks and say, there's a very real possibility that they are going to be starting some games early on in the season for this Clemson team. So I would throw some of those boundary cornerbacks into this list as well. But I think one thing you can have a lot of confidence in, Dabo Swinney, if you are a true freshman that is good enough to play for Clemson, he's going to lean on you. He's going to play you. He's going to play the best football players, the players that give this Clemson team the biggest chance and best chance to win on Saturdays. And you got a lot of freshmen that I think can, in some sort of way, impact this Clemson team. Those are the 5 freshmen that I would be looking for. At the running back position, David, I think he could be a guy too. It sounds like Keith Adams might have taken that running back 2 spot, but I think that is certainly up for the taking after Phil Mafra, who's going to emerge as that running back. I think it certainly could be David. So we'll see how it plays out. Those are my 5 freshmen that I think are going to have the biggest impact for this Clemson program. We'll cut it down there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.